We are here with Medea Benjamin in her lovely home. One of the first things I noticed was the consistency in the color palette. Really beautiful, the blend of visual arts with peace activism. Thank you so much for agreeing to give us this interview.
Wonderful, my pleasure.
And one of the first things that I had to ask is, how long have you been a peace activist?
Longer probably than you've been on this earth. I started being a peace activist in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. I was in high school, and at that time there was a draft, which meant that it wasn't a volunteer army, it was mandatory. And so my friends, my boyfriends, people that I knew were being sent thousands of miles away to kill people they knew nothing about and they had no idea why. And I was just shocked that we would be doing this and started an anti-war group in my high school. So I've been doing this for many decades. And unfortunately, this country just is constantly involved in war and has what President Eisenhower, who was also a general in 1961, said, beware of the power of the military-industrial complex, meaning it's big business as well. And unfortunately, it is a big business making war. And I must say that with all these years of trying to stop wars, it's been very hard, and you come up against just this huge war machine that profits from destruction and war and violence.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that there is a big profit in all of this, which means that it comes as a big financial burden to us, the taxpayers. But it is unfortunate how a lot of times I find that being a peace activist means you expose yourself to the criticism that you're being unpatriotic. How have you dealt with that criticism?
It always comes down to that, and especially in times of war where it's seen you got to rally around the flag, you might not like the person in the White House, or you might be against the reason they got into the war, but now that we're at war and now that our soldiers' lives are being jeopardized, we've got to put all that criticism behind. I say no, that's precisely when you have to take a stand and say, if I'm for peace, and if dissent is patriotic, then it's at this time where we've got to come out on the streets, in the congressional offices, doing whatever we can do using our First Amendment right to free speech to say, no, this is wrong, this is not what my country should be doing. But you do get a lot of criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the most patriotic thing to do in the United States is to continuously exercise that dissent. To be a part of the opposition means that you are being American, because if we were to fall along those lines, the reactionary stand of not doing anything, we would still be under England. I mean,
that's right, and that's why Benjamin Franklin said that dissent is patriotic, and on the flip side of that, its silence is complicity. So if you're just like sitting back and saying, well, these people who know more than I do are going to fix it, no, it really is up to us as citizens when we feel our government is taking the wrong path. No matter, that's when we have to put partisan politics aside. Correct. And a group like, I'm part of this group called Code Pink, a women's peace group, and we protested for years when Bush took us to war in Iraq, and then we protested for years when Obama continued most of those wars, and here we are today protesting under Trump. So for us, it's not a partisan issue. For us, it's really an issue about morality.
Yeah, you mentioned Code Pink. Under what circumstances did that come into existence?
So when after the 9/11 attacks happened, there was a color-coded alert system that George Bush put out, and it had yellow was the lowest, things were kind of mellow. Then if it was orange or red, it would mean that there was more danger. And we thought it was just a way to keep people in a constant state of fear to justify going to war. and justify the invasion of entire countries instead of just focusing on who was it that attacked us. And so we said we need another color-coded alert, and we wanted something like, we wanted a hot pink, but that was taken by a porn site, so we couldn't be hot pink. So we just plain old code pink, but it's been a way to say that there's another way to respond to attacks that doesn't just get us into this endless cycle of violence.
Yeah, around that time, I was a teenager back when Bush and Fox News, and you had that culture that was very isolating. It fostered hysteria, paranoia. I was constantly like almost biting my nails, checking out all those graphics. They'd show how it would feel to be caught under nuclear arms. I feared nuclear weapons. Obviously, there were none and all that. But when you find yourself a normal average civilian that obviously doesn't have a lot of time on his hands to go do the deep research and see all the talking points. This time around, we do have a difference with the Iraq war and potentially getting dragged into a war with Iran. This time around, there is a big presence of an alternative media out there on the internet. Do you think that maybe we have a better chance of not getting sucked into the war propaganda, that emotional turmoil?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we have also a history of 20 years to look back on and see that everything the U.S. has done in the Middle East has been crap. Every time we go in and we say we're going to get rid of a dictator and put in a better government, it's been a mess, whether we're talking about Iraq or Libya or U.S. involvement in the war in Syria, and now the U.S. involved in a war we never hear about and talk about, which is one in Yemen. It's always been bad. And as you say, we also have some alternative media sources, and I think there is a lot of healthy skepticism about Donald Trump himself, because he's known to lie so much that why shouldn't he be lying about why he thought it was necessary to kill the top general, Soleimani, of another country. I also think there is just a large anti-war sentiment in this country. It's why Donald Trump talked about ending the endless wars when he was campaigning. Yeah. It's why polls show that the American people don't want to be dragged into another war. People are tired of all the wars that we've been in. And so I think that gives us some elements to work with now to try to stop us from getting into the next war.
It's been mentioned that Donald Trump is trying to distract from impeachment. Now, I'm wondering also, could it be that he fears something like a Bernie Sanders presidency? Because it is said that presidents that are in war get reelected easily. And he's didn't start a new war these last 3 years, but could this be a last minute idea for one thing? He could also be trying to really get us into our economy, into a wartime economy, which also distracts, because currently they say that at the Wall Street level the economy is doing good, but we know it's not doing good for average day people, unless of course you're in Wall Street. So could this be one of those strange maneuvers or a combination of these factors? I mean, I want to know what you think is the real reason why Donald Trump is getting us into this. Because it comes out kind of out of the blue. Most Americans didn't know who Soleimani was. They even deleted from Wikipedia a couple hours ago the mention that Soleimani actually approached U.S. officials post 9/11 to give information as to how to capture Al-Qaeda insurgents. So he's not clearly the bad guy they're putting him out to be. I don't want to defend the guy, but it feels like, again, they're painting this picture because of something. What is their real reason? Because I don't think it's to defend American interests.
Well, first let's recognize that the number one foreign policy achievement of the Obama administration was the Iran nuclear deal. And that Trump, during his campaign, said, this is the worst deal. Well, this is a deal that the entire world was supporting, that the UN approved of, that the European Union approved of, that China and Russia all approved of. And it was a deal that Iran was abiding by. But Donald Trump said no. Who was Donald Trump listening to? He was listening to the Israelis, he was listening to the Saudis, and he was listening to the neocons, the war hawks in the United States. When he came into office, one of the first things he did was precisely to withdraw from that Iran nuclear deal. So he was already setting the stage for a war with Iran. Not only did he pull us out of the nuclear deal, he imposed these horrific sanctions on Iran that said, U.S. companies can't trade with Iran, but you know what? Nobody can trade with Iran. We don't want companies around the world. We don't want Iran to be able to sell its oil. I have been to Iran several times, including recently. The squeeze has been tremendous, and the government has been desperate to try to find a way around these sanctions. And at some point, for an entire year, they had a policy called strategic patience. They were just going to wait, and they waited to see, are the Europeans going to do something? Who else is going to do something? Yeah. They didn't.
Right out the storm.
Yeah. And the storm just kept getting worse because the U.S. kept finding new ways to squeeze Iran. So this was going to explode. Now, you could ask, why is the timing happening the week that there's supposed to be impeachment hearings in the Senate? That's a good question. You can also look back and see that Trump said Obama is going to start a war with Iran to help his re-election campaign. There are certainly, I'm sure, factors around that because people do rally around a president in a time of war. But he has been setting the stage for this from the time that he first took office.
Mike Pompeo has mentioned on TV, as other Pentagon officials, they keep insisting that this is for peace. And knowing that you are an authentic, the genuine, real deal of what a peace activist should look like, operate, it just feels so disingenuous. It's kind of like an Orwellian doublespeak sort of thing where they say, this is for peace, and yet they're bringing us closer to war. The usurpation of the language, they're stealing our words because obviously people want peace, just like they say that they use the word clean and nurturing and love, and all of this is a fraud. But you find that the other side is, like the most loyal Trump supporters, they are completely ignoring the fact that one of his Donald Trump's campaign promises was that he was not going to start another regime change war. And I'm worried that there is no healthy dose of criticism. That, maybe it's too much to expect from a certain demographic that is saying that Trump speaks the word of God. But can we put our hopes in reaching a consensus that is bipartisan, where Republicans that are genuinely interested in the welfare of the United States will decide not to be so loyal to Trump this time around and take a look at the bigger picture as to what really benefits America? Do you have any hope of perhaps these people seeing the light?
It's tough. We're in a very difficult situation as peacemakers because we know that Iran is going to respond. And there are going to be American soldiers who will be killed. Yeah. And then Trump has already said, we have 52 places that we're going to then go against. And so, this cycle is in motion. How do you stop that cycle? Well, I think you do it from a number of different ways. One is we have to build up a real anti-war movement in this country. And it's got to be visible. It's got to be on the streets. We started out this weekend with over 80 cities having people come out. Well, we need to have more people, more cities. It's got to be constant. We have to have an international call for peace that's both grassroots and from the top. And we have done this before in the case of the war in Iraq, where we had huge global demonstrations, and we need that kind of thing again. Then we also have countries that are trying to intervene, like China is, to say, hey, let's talk to both sides, let's see what we can do. There are European countries that are trying to do that. And then we need to reach beyond partisan politics and find people in the right, as you were saying. And we have done this before. We did this under Obama. I think it was in 2014 when Obama said that Assad in Syria had crossed the red line by using chemical weapons and we were going to go in there. And we came together as left and right. I remember because I was very involved in this. We reached out to the Tea Party and we worked together to swarm Congress and say, stop this. And Congress stopped it. So I think there is hope if all of these elements come together very, very quickly. We also have to take into account what's happening in the Middle East. The Iraqi parliament is saying the U.S. troops have to get out of there. So what is the U.S. going to do? Say, no, we're going to stay in there? I mean, there is movement that's going to be happening where the Arab countries know that this is going to play out on their soil, and they're the ones who are going to be the victims. So there are a number of different countries, groups, people coming together to say how we can stop it. You know, what really drives me crazy is that now we're talking about one person, Donald Trump, whether he's going to take us into an all-out war in the Middle East or not. And that's very scary, given who Donald Trump is. But Donald Trump is also a smart guy and understands that if he's going against public opinion in the United States and if he's going against global opinion, maybe there is a chance to stop him.
Yeah, because certainly there is, from Republicans, Democrats, and independents, people with no party affiliation, do genuinely have this feeling that it needs to stop. And that was the great allure of the Donald Trump campaign, Make America Great Again, by prioritizing America's needs, which naturally should include saving the lives of the soldiers. And we would not want to go back, because if this escalates and we go into World War III, which could very well happen, you know, everything is possible. We can't discard these terrible twists and turns of history. As somebody who has 5 brothers, I definitely would not want to see a mandatory draft reenacted. But do you think it's possible to really put a stop to all of this? Because you mentioned all this global condemnation, reputation from governments, even the UN was against the war in Iraq. The protests were massive. They took to the streets in great numbers. I was really, really impressed. Democracy Now! Did a great coverage back then, but it still happened. So I don't want to be a pessimist, but can we really, with vigils, marches, put a stop to something that might have been decided maybe a couple of months ago?
Who knows? But the question then is, what do? We have to do everything we can to try to stop it.
Yeah.
There's no choice at all. I think first is to educate people, and that's why I'm really glad we're doing this show. We have to educate people in a very clear way to say, this is a crisis that was manufactured by Donald Trump, period. We're not talking about Iranian aggression. We're talking about U.S. aggression. Iran had signed a nuclear deal. They had adhered to that nuclear deal. Iran was ready to talk about other issues. It's Donald Trump who came in and said, ripping it up. This is a manufactured crisis. The blame is at the doorstep of the White House. And if people understand that, I think they won't be caught up in Iran did this, Soleimani did this. That's not the issue. The issue is that Donald Trump has violated international law, taken us out of an international agreement, assassinated a general on somebody else's soil. And yes. You know what? It's on Iraqi soil. And you know what? The Iraqi Constitution says you can't do that. You know who helped write the Iraqi Constitution? The U.S. It's ridiculous. And so I think we have to be very clear what the narrative is in this case. And then we have to be very clear that we have a responsibility when we have a guy in the White House who is acting totally illegal. According to U.S. law, it's not the executive branch that determines whether we go to war. It is the Congress. He went ahead and did an act of war of killing the general, Iranian general, without going to Congress, illegal. So when somebody is acting against international law, because there is not an imminent threat strong enough, I am absolutely positive, that would have justified what he did, then we have to, as citizens, stand up against it. Will we be successful? Who knows? But certainly, history will judge us very, very poorly if we don't stand up and try to stop this.
War not only is terrible for the loss of human life abroad, here, everywhere. Can we look at the financial costs of war? Like, even if we are heartless people, this will mean we pay a price for it, and it costs millions of dollars. So how do they plan on explaining to the American public that we cannot afford to give people working class Americans something like a Medicare for all option, healthcare that all the other industrialized nations have, while they do most easily find the money to finance wars.
Well, I think that's where we have an in with talking to large sections of the American public, because there are movements, especially among young people now, around the environment. We need to do something to save this planet. This Green for All, this Green New Deal plan would cost a lot of money. Where's that going to come from? We've already been saying the only place there's a big pot of gold is the Pentagon, and we've got to cut that budget. Now, if you're saying we're going to have a new war on top of that, it's going to be even more money that we're spending on the Pentagon. And we can't afford it as it is now. We need that money to address the climate. We need that money for Medicare for all, which people in this country deserve. And we need that money for people to be able to go to college and not come out of college with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Infrastructure in this country. I mean, it's amazing when you travel somewhere else and you see the great public transportation systems they have. And you see the crumbling infrastructure we have in this country. So we've already spent not millions, not billions, but trillions of dollars on the war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is overrun by the Taliban 20 years after we've been there. We spent trillions of dollars on the war in Iraq. Iraq is just kicking us out. These have been total sucks of huge amounts of money that we cannot afford. And if we go into a war with Iran, it will just explode the amount of money that this is going to cost. And so that alone should be a reason for people to stand up and say, we can't do this, we can't afford this.
I'm also worried about the loss of civil liberties, because when you get into war, there is this negative aspect to it also for us. Like, let's say, okay, the women and children left behind, although women are also being drafted nowadays. So when you're in a society that is involved in war, I find that certain things will be censored. Your freedom of speech, that's going to be taken away. It becomes a society where everything is justified because you're in a state of exception, and you can't do that because it's unpatriotic, and you're organizing, and you could be leaking information to the enemy. Are we really in America, where we're so polarized these days, where it feels like the other side doesn't want to get along, I don't think, it's also like when you paint the picture, the national picture, it looks like we're not even ready at the internal level, ready to withstand something of that magnitude, because we began this new decade, the 2020, with obvious signs of the failure of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So if we were to do this would be a grave mistake, to get into a war with Iran, which, if you stretch it out, because they've got tons of mountains, if you stretch it out, it is a huge and vast territory. It's going to be Iraq and Afghanistan combined. So this will not be an operation that we quit. Oh, we'll just send in the Marines, have a barbecue by sunset. No, it's not. It's going to be dragging on for years and years. Looking at it from the perspective of the civilian population, can we really withstand something like that?
Well, I feel sorry for young people who don't know how many liberties we've lost since the 9/11 attacks. Already. How different a country this is today than it was before, and how much worse it would get. And I think that's important for people to understand. But I think there's an issue we haven't talked about that I would like to bring up, which is we have so little understanding and compassion in this country for the destruction that we cause to other people. And while I am worried about my civil liberties, I am worried about what's going to happen to the people in Iran, what's going to happen to the people in Iraq, what's going to happen to the people in Lebanon, what's going to happen in the Middle East, where we've already destroyed so many lives, and our media doesn't show.
Museums included. The looting that happens, the destruction to culture.
Yeah. But the displacement of millions of people, the death of millions of people who now live without limbs in countries where it's really, really hard to get a wheelchair, really, really hard to get around. I mean, we have destroyed so many lives. And We don't even consider that we should be paying reparations for all that we've done in Iraq so far. Unthinkable. Yeah. Which is, it shouldn't be unthinkable.
Well, it would be unthinkable if we abandoned veterans afterwards.
We abandoned our own veterans. But I just wish that we would have more compassion and for other people and what we've been doing to other people to make their lives so miserable. And then maybe we'd understand why there is so much anti-US sentiment around the world.
Yes.
We should ask, why do people in Iran not like, they like individual Americans, why don't they like our government? Maybe we should go back to 1953 when we overthrew their democratically elected government because it was going to nationalize their oil. We have done so many terrible things to people around the world, particularly in the Middle East. And it's just time for us to recognize that everything we've done has caused death and destruction and misery. And it's time for us to get out. Our troops should not be reinforced right now with thousands more being sent in. It should be just the opposite. There should not be U.S. troops in the Middle East. And further than that, we should be asking now, why do we have over 800 military bases around the world? We're the only country in the world that does that.
Bases that pollute a lot. The cost of the environment is amazing.
And that cause animosity with local populations. Mm-hmm. We are way overstretched as an empire already. And instead of getting deeper and deeper into this quagmire, it should be a time when we say, okay, let's withdraw our troops from the Middle East. Let's not incite more violence against us. Let's not have sitting ducks of thousands of our troops because they're the ones that are going to be attacked right now. So I just, hope that not only can we stop Donald Trump from taking us down into this war, but that we use this as a time to say, we've got to bring our troops back home, have our military defend us internally here, not constantly seeking enemies abroad.
I couldn't agree more. When you hear the right-wing talking point of having a stand against immigrants, well, you have to go back to the source. Well, these massive displacements of millions of people, the constant creation of refugees, well, that's a consequence of regime change wars. So if people in Europe, the right-wingers, where they say, oh, we don't want immigrants, or people here, the really loyal Trump base that wants a tougher stand on immigration, that they want to create that wall in the southern border. Well, if you have that imperialistic attitude, that despotic, it's like an elitist despisal of other cultures, you're going to naturally be creating more immigrants. Now, clearly, the policies that our foreign policy is not working, and we are creating more enemies than friends. And it just shows you that. I mean, in Iraq, after years of being there and supposedly helping them have democracy, well, they're chanting death to America. So clearly it's not working. And it's just unfortunate that we don't seem to have a stronger anti-war movement. I feel like it was still stronger in the 60s. Can you compare them? Like what is missing now that they did have in the 60s?
So in the 60s, there was a draft, which meant every family was affected by it. And when family is affected and young people are affected, you have a huge movement.
That's a good point.
And you have a lot of young people who are in the leadership of the movement, which we don't have now. In fact, many of the people in the anti-war movement today are people who came out of the Vietnam days.
That's what I've
and
noticed,
like me, we're now in our 60s, 70s. So the powers that be in our country were very smart about all of this. They understood that if you have a draft, you're going to get an anti-war movement. Better fight these wars with a, quote, volunteer army. And I say, quote, volunteer army because in many ways it's a poverty army. When you don't pay people, when people can't afford to go to college and you dangle in front of them, get a free education by going to the military and healthcare. It can be called a poverty draft. But because it is not obligatory anymore, you don't have that spontaneous anti-war movement, especially among young people. The other thing that we have to recognize is that there was a really strong anti-war movement to stop the war in Iraq. But when Obama came in, he came in like Donald Trump. Basically, people thought he was going to end the wars. He was against the war in Iraq. That's why he got the lead over Hillary Clinton. And we thought he was going to get us out of these wars. So the anti-war movement dissolved and said, well, we're going to leave it to Obama. He's going to be our peace president. It was also the time of the financial crisis. Yeah. People had a lot of other things to worry about. And for a combination of reasons, we didn't have an anti-war movement while we still had wars going on in the Middle East. And the other thing to recognize is when you have wars for so long, it seems normal to people. So it's hard to get them, out there to say, let's stop these wars when they're wars that have been going on for 15 and now 20 years.
Most young people have been born already.
Born with them. They know nothing other than
They don't
war.
remember the 90s.
So the wars are more hidden. They've been a constant sort of low-grade cancer that people have learned to live with. And they also have other issues like the climate, like healthcare for all, like part of the presidential campaigns, other things to organize around. So for all of those reasons, we don't have a strong anti-war movement at a time when we need to be flooding the streets saying no. On the other side, I would say that within 48 hours, my organization, Code Pink, with another group, the Answer Coalition, managed to put out a call that led to protests in over 80 cities around this country. And some of them, like in New York, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, were significant numbers of people. So there is a base to work with. We've just got to be quick and get out there and build on it and get lots of other organizations that have big memberships, like Move On, like Indivisible, like these other groups that are somewhat more affiliated with the Democratic Party, groups like the Democratic Socialists of America that have chapters all over the country. We have to get those organizations on board, and then I think we can get big numbers out.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have any plans specifically? Because this is just the beginning. This is probably going to drag on and on. Do you have any plans specifically as to how to make that war movement strong again?
Well, we're reaching out to all of those organizations immediately to say, what are you doing? You're doing petitions into Congress. Let's all deliver them. Let's flood Congress.
Yeah, you stormed Congressman's offices.
Oh, yeah, and we're going to be doing it again. In fact, I'm going tomorrow to D.C. to just be in the halls of Congress every single day, doing sit-ins in the offices. We want to do constant protests every single week, every Saturday, get more and more people out, because we got to be ready when the attack happens on the part of Iran and then the counterattack again. So we got to get people ready to be getting out on the streets. We have to do teach-ins. And
teachings, that's a 60s thing.
That's a 60s thing, yeah. And maybe we got to call it something different so it doesn't sound so old-fashioned. But it means we have to have educational programs happening in churches, synagogues, mosques, and universities, in all places where people gather, to explain where is the conflict with Iran coming from, where is what is the history of it, what might this lead to, how can we become cogs that stop the wheels from going, and then I think that we have to have more creative protests. We can do things in front of Trump properties, whether it's Mar-a-Lago or Trump Towers, or things where maybe they would get more media attention. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to be creative. And mostly we've got to get a lot of young people involved, because you can't have a strong movement unless you have young people, and young people have to take leadership. And young people tend to have more creative ideas. They have to step up. This is their future. I think it's fantastic the way young people are stepping up around the environment. But, we're not going to have a planet if we go into World War III and we start with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, because war in itself is the worst attack on the planet.
The Pentagon is the #1 polluter in the world.
And I don't think most people realize that.
No.
how you've had bases that are contaminating the local population, like in Puerto Rico, where people have cancer. And
so the anti-war movement and the environmental movement should be one and the same. Mm-hmm. And I think those things are happening. For example, the Women's March that has been happening every year. They just sent out something about the war. It was very hard for us to get them to talk about the war issues, and now they're talking about it. So I think a lot of other organizations are saying maybe we have to put our other work on hold right now and all focus on this issue of stopping the next war.
Now, Medea, this is more of a personal question. Where do you find the energy to be such a big peace activist?
I'm asking myself.
I've been seeing you for like almost all of my life. Like you flip through channels and you are like, I would say the most clearly defined pink, happy, feminine face of what it means to be a peace activist. I think you have become like a big symbol, and I salute you for that. But I mean, you're just like me. You're petite. Where do you get this energy? The motivation, the drive.
I get a lot of the motivation by having visited these countries and having friends there, and
so you've got hands-on experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to Iraq many times. I've been to Iran. I've been to Syria, to Afghanistan, to Lebanon, to Yemen, and I see the direct effects of what my government is doing. Yeah. And I have people say to me, why is your government doing this to us? Why are the American people letting this happen? And then I turn on the TV in the U.S. and I see a totally different, it's not a different reality, it's made up garbage about what's happening in the rest of the world. I mean, talking about Soleimani for destroying the lives of so many Americans, no, it's the U.S. government that sent our soldiers overseas on the basis of lies that should be held responsible for the death of so many American soldiers. Iran is not trying to attack the United States, it's the United States attacking Iran. So you see how it's portrayed in the United States, and it makes me furious. And I think, turning that motivation of both caring about other people and seeing how it's distorted in our own media is a combination that gives me a lot of energy to fight what our government is doing.
So, just to sum it up, let's have our last question then. I mean, we could go on. This is great stuff. You mentioned Code Pink, and I really think it's important in this male-dominated world. I mean, the structures, everything was created to salute typically male characteristics. And I mean, I don't see the men wearing skirts. We've adopted pants. So in a certain way, it's all built to favor what comes very naturally to a lot of men. Now, what kind of advice would you give women that are getting into activism, becoming politicians, trying to take on, heck, maybe even taking on academia, in whatever front? How do you think we can, because you mentioned empathy, and I always tell people that empathy is down right now with the new generation, 40%. So this is a real thing. The fact that you have seen people affected by the sanctions and our aggressive foreign policy means that you are able to see the other side. You understand that they're not statistics, they're people. What advice would you give women that are embracing their pink and that they want to change the tone and create a culture of that's more nurturing, that's more inclusive, that has a broader vision of the world, not such a narrow focus thing? What advice would you give them?
One, don't allow yourself or your loved ones to get into this rah, USA, we are number one. We're not. We are one country, and there's beautiful, wonderful countries all over the world. There are great things about our country, and there are great things about other countries. So recognize we are one among many nations. We don't have all the answers, and that we should be more humble the way we look at the world, the way we act in the world, the way we deal in the world. And that, I think, can go from your home, your community, your city, your state, up to how you look at and deal with the rest of the world. To recognize that we always have things to learn from other peoples and other cultures. I mean, you take Iran. They have thousands of years of history. We in this country are a little baby compared to Iran. They have the most beautiful poetry. Read some Iranian poetry. You'll fall in love with them. Look at some Iranian architecture and your jaw will drop. You will
get cultured.
Yeah, get culture. Like, how did these people build these gorgeous things? Learn to appreciate other people's and other cultures, and that makes you kind of step down for a bit. On the other hand, I think we have to think about how we get active and how we build activism, and we build activism in a way that doesn't take our anger to the next level.
Yeah.
It finds ways to kind of calm us down as we do the organizing. Singing, I always think it's important to do some singing and bring people together in that kind of way. When you see people on opposite sides around this issue, kind of try to step in and calm things down a little bit. So I would say in a general sense, use feminist ways, whether you're a woman or a man, to take your anger but channel it into something that's positive, and understand that when you're creating a movement, it has to be something that people want to join, and they don't want to join when it's all about anger. They want to join when it has something about joy and loving and compassion.
Well, thank you, Medea Benjamin, for this amazing chance for us to listen to your thoughts. And again, thank you on behalf of all the peace activists in the world. Thank you so much for contributing to making this world a better place by giving it more love and more feminine positivity. So thank you.
Talking to you gives me more inspiration and positivity. Thank you.
Wonderful.